It was late afternoon in a quiet Midwestern town, the kind of town where Main Street had only a handful of shops, a diner with neon lights that buzzed even during the day, and a grocery store that served as the unofficial heartbeat of the community. The sky was painted in thick shades of gray, and the air carried that heavy stillness that comes just before the rain decides to pour. Then, without warning, it came down hard, thick sheets of water pounding against rooftops, trickling down gutters, splashing against car tires as they hurried past. Most people rushed for cover. Mothers grabbed their children's hands, pulling them faster into doorways. Office workers with jackets over their heads dashed across crosswalks. Drivers leaned forward, squinting through fogged-up windshields, eager to get home to warmth and dry clothes. But in the middle of all that rushing, in front of the grocery store's sliding glass doors, a little boy stood utterly still. He was no older than 8. His jeans were too long for his small frame, the cuffs heavy with rainwater, dragging against his mud-stained sneakers. His jacket had seen better days, faded navy blue, its zipper half broken, a patch barely holding on at the elbow. The rain soaked through the fabric, sticking it to his thin body. Yet his small face carried something unusual, a stubborn smile. Beside him sat a cardboard box, its sides warping under the dampness. Inside were just a handful of paper sheets, each carefully protected in clear plastic sleeves, though some edges curled where water had found its way in. Crayon drawings, pencil sketches, childlike, imperfect, yet full of soul. The boy held one up, lifting it as if it were something priceless. His voice was small, but he forced it to rise above the rainfall. Drawings for $1. $1 for a drawing. People walked past him. Some spared him a glance, most didn't. A few tightened their umbrellas, quickening their steps as though afraid that acknowledging him might cost them time or money. One man muttered, "Kid should be home," shaking his head before disappearing inside. Still, the boy stood tall, repeating his call, "Drawings for $1." His voice cracked under the weight of the rain, but there was no self-pity, no begging. Just determination. From across the street, through the glass windows of a cozy cafe, a group of college students laughed over steaming mugs. They didn't notice him, but the audience would. The contrast was striking, warmth and safety on one side of the glass, and a soaked, trembling child on the other. It wasn't just about poverty. It was about the quiet resilience that kept him rooted to the spot when he could have run home to shelter. Cars rolled by, spraying water from their tires, headlights glowing dim through the curtain of rain. A red pickup slowed down briefly, the driver's eyes catching the boy, but after a beat, the truck rolled on, leaving behind only the echo of splashing water. The boy bent down, checking the box. Only one drawing remained. He picked it up, carefully pressing down its corners. It was brighter than the others, almost as if he had poured more hope into this last piece. A rainbow stretched across the page, drawn in thick crayon strokes, uneven yet vibrant. Beneath it, 2 stick figures held hands, one tall, one small. The larger figure's hair was long, scribbled in soft brown, while the smaller one's smile beamed wide. Above them, in clumsy but heartfelt handwriting, were the words, "Together in the sunshine." The boy stared at it, lips pressing together, his eyes reflecting something deeper than his age should carry. He whispered to himself, almost inaudible under the pounding rain, "This one's special." The rain beat harder. He shivered, clutching the page close, shielding it under the flimsy cardboard lid. His little hands were red from the cold, his nails dirty but his grip steady. Inside the grocery store, shoppers glanced through the glass doors before pushing their carts out, each person dodging him like he was part of the weather, something inconvenient but unavoidable. A woman pulled her coat tighter and murmured, "Poor kid," but still kept walking. A man with 2 grocery bags lifted his head just enough to scowl before moving on. The boy didn't react to any of it. He simply kept standing there, as though he had made a promise to himself that he refused to break. Minutes felt like hours. The rain blurred the world around him until only he and that final drawing seemed in focus. And then, out of nowhere, a black SUV slowed as it turned the corner. Its headlights cast a brief glow across the boy's face. The driver's side window lowered just a little, and through the rain-spattered glass, a pair of eyes caught sight of him. A woman's eyes. For a moment, everything else faded, the noise of cars, the chatter of people, even the relentless rain. There was only the boy clutching his rainbow drawing, and the woman staring at him with a gaze that wasn't like the others. Hers wasn't quick or dismissive. It was steady, searching, almost haunted. The boy raised the drawing slightly higher, his lips trembling but his voice unwavering. "Drawings for $1." The woman inside the SUV didn't move. She just looked, her hand frozen on the steering wheel, her breath caught in her chest. Her face, framed by the glow of the dashboard lights, softened in a way she hadn't allowed in years. As the camera lingers on her expression, the narration slows. The audience senses it, the story is about to begin. Not just the story of a boy selling drawings in the rain, but of how one fragile sheet of paper, one crayon rainbow, will unravel buried grief, open locked hearts, and bring two very different lives crashing into each other. The screen fades to black. A single line echoes like a whisper. "Sometimes, the smallest hands carry the heaviest hopes." The rainstorm outside the grocery store lingered in Sarah Mitchell's mind long after she had driven away. Her Lexus SUV cut smoothly along the slick highway, windshield wipers slicing through sheets of rain, but her thoughts were still back at that storefront, still fixed on the small boy clutching a crayon drawing as though it were treasure. She pressed the accelerator a little harder, as though speed could drown memory, but the image clung to her like the smell of rain clings to earth. Sarah Mitchell, 36 years old, had all the trappings of a successful American woman. She lived in a sleek apartment high above the city, with white marble countertops, polished hardwood floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a skyline most people only dreamed of. She drove expensive cars, wore designer scarves even on casual days, and kept her hair in a perfectly styled bob that suggested order and control. On paper, her life was enviable, prosperous, polished, and secure. But paper is fragile. Paper burns, tears, and dissolves in the rain. And Sarah's life, though flawless to the world, carried tears invisible to most. That evening, she arrived at her apartment and stepped into silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing in on you, reminding you of what isn't there. No shoes by the door except her own. No clutter from children. No second mug on the counter waiting for morning coffee. Just one woman's world, carefully curated and painfully empty. She dropped her handbag on the counter, slipping off her heels. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the room, underscoring her solitude. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. Rows of apartments glowed like constellations, each square of light holding lives she didn't know, families watching television together, couples arguing in kitchens, children doing homework at dining tables. Lives noisy and imperfect. Lives full. Sarah had once imagined her future would look like that. She had married young, to a man who promised laughter and stability. They had built dreams together, a house in the suburbs, kids playing soccer on weekends, summer trips to the lake. But promises had a way of thinning out when tested by reality. He left 5 years ago, chasing another life with another woman. The divorce papers had been clean, efficient, and devastating. Since then, Sarah poured herself into her career as an interior designer. She was good, no, she was exceptional. Her clients were wealthy, her projects featured in magazines, her reputation sharp and shining. But success had edges. The higher she climbed, the more she realized she had built walls instead of a home. Every week, she drove to the small town an hour away to visit her mother, now living in Maplewood nursing home. Their relationship had never been easy. Her mother, Evelyn, was a stern woman shaped by years of single parenting and hard factory work. She had little patience for weakness and even less for Sarah's choices. When Sarah divorced, Evelyn didn't console her. Instead, she said, at least you won't waste more years on a man who doesn't stay. Their conversations now were limited, polite but strained. Visits felt more like obligations than reunions. On this particular trip, Sarah had stopped at the grocery store for supplies her mother liked: ginger tea, saltine crackers, the crossword puzzle book she pretended not to enjoy but always finished. That was when she noticed the boy in the rain. She hadn't meant to stop. She had errands, responsibilities, deadlines. But the sight of him, small and soaked yet standing proud, carved its way into her. Something in his eyes reminded her of herself at 8 years old, determined, but lonely. Now, hours later, Sarah found herself unpacking groceries into her pristine refrigerator, pausing when her gaze fell on the thin plastic sleeve she had taken with her, the boy's drawing. She had placed it carefully between 2 folders in her bag, though she didn't fully know why. She pulled it out now, laying it gently on the counter. The colors were uneven, the rainbow crooked, the figures simplistic. It was a child's art, no question. Yet there was something arresting about it. The way the crayon had pressed harder on the rainbow's arch, as if he wanted to make sure it wouldn't fade. The stick figures holding hands, smiling despite the storm drawn faintly in the background. The word scribbled underneath, together in the sunshine. Her throat tightened. She leaned against the counter, tracing the rainbow with her finger. A memory stirred. Her father, gone too soon, used to draw rainbows for her when she was scared of storms. He would sit at the kitchen table with cheap crayons, sketching sloppy arcs across notebook paper, telling her, "Storms don't last forever, kiddo. The rainbow always comes." Her eyes stung. She hadn't thought about that in years. She hadn't wanted to. Sarah blinked hard, pushing the paper away, as if distance could protect her from the ache it carried. She told herself it was just a child's drawing, nothing more. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was a reminder. A mirror. A wound. Later that night, Sarah sat on her sofa with her laptop, answering client emails, revising floor plans, pretending productivity was enough to fill the silence. But the drawing lay on the coffee table, always in her peripheral vision, whispering truths she didn't want to hear. She tried to ignore it. She told herself she had no space in her world for strangers' burdens. She was already stretched, her career, her mother's care, her own fragile balance. Yet the boy's face kept flashing before her eyes. The determination in his small voice. The pride in his offering. The rain clinging to his hair. It unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. She had seen poverty before, seen children selling candy or washing car windows at intersections. But this boy was different. He wasn't begging. He wasn't desperate. He was purposeful. And that purpose lingered with her like a haunting. By midnight, Sarah closed her laptop, restless. She stood at the window again, watching the city glitter. Somewhere, out in that storm, a boy with soaked sneakers and crayon-stained hands was trying to make his small corner of the world better. And here she was, in her glass tower, with all her comforts and none of the warmth. Her reflection in the window looked tired, lonely, unfinished. She whispered into the silence, almost without meaning to, "Why can't I stop thinking about him?" The city didn't answer. The night didn't comfort. But the rainbow on her table glowed faintly in the lamplight, daring her to remember that storms never last. The rain had slowed by the next morning, leaving the small Midwestern town washed clean, its sidewalks slick and its storefronts glistening under the pale light of an overcast sky. Sarah had promised herself she wouldn't stop, that she would just get her errands done and head straight to the nursing home. She had too much on her plate already. And yet, when she parked near the grocery store, her eyes immediately searched the spot where she had seen him the day before. She told herself it was just curiosity, just to check. But her heart sank when she spotted him again, Ethan, standing in the same place, his box of drawings at his feet. He wasn't soaked this time, but his jacket still looked thin against the crisp wind. His shoes squished slightly as he shifted from foot to foot, holding up another picture to passers-by. People continued to hurry past him, some glancing, most ignoring. His small voice rose again, steady despite its softness. Drawings for $1. $1 for a drawing. Sarah paused by the edge of the parking lot, her car keys tight in her hand. She didn't owe him anything. She didn't even know him. And yet, something about his resilience pulled her across the asphalt and up onto the sidewalk. When she approached, Ethan noticed her immediately. His eyes, bright despite the shadows beneath them, lit up as though he recognized her. "Hi," he said shyly, lowering the paper in his hand. "Hi," Sarah replied, her voice softer than she expected. She glanced at the box. A few sheets lay inside, the colors smudged slightly where rain had seeped through yesterday. "Still selling?" He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. $1 each." Sarah crouched slightly to meet his gaze, her heels clicking against the wet concrete. "Can I ask, why are you selling drawings?" The boy hesitated, clutching the paper tighter. "I'm raising money," he said carefully. "For something important." "What's so important?" she asked gently. His lips pressed together. "It's for my mom. She works really hard. I want to help." The simplicity of his words struck her harder than she expected. She swallowed, nodding slowly. "That's very thoughtful of you." He glanced down at the paper in his hand and held it out to her. "This one's my favorite. I saved it for yesterday, but nobody wanted it." Sarah took the sheet carefully. The drawing was crayon, bright against the faint gray smudges. A rainbow arched across the page, two stick figures beneath it, one taller, one smaller. Their hands touched, their smiles wide. Above them, the same words she had seen last night glowed again in clumsy, heartfelt handwriting, "Together in the sunshine." For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. The image blurred in her vision, not because of rain but because of memory. She was 8 years old again, sitting at a kitchen table, crayons rolling across the surface as her father's large, calloused hand sketched a rainbow on a piece of lined notebook paper. His voice echoing, "Storms don't last forever, kiddo. The rainbow always comes." Her throat tightened painfully. She blinked, forcing herself back to the present. She stopped, not trusting her voice. Finally, she managed, "It's beautiful." Ethan's face brightened. "Really?" "Yes," she said firmly. She reached into her purse, pulling out her wallet. She started to hand him a $10 bill, but he shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. It's $1. That's the price." Sarah tilted her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But it's worth more than that." Ethan hesitated, his little brow furrowing. Then, in a voice that carried both innocence and a surprising kind of wisdom, he said, "It's worth only what you think it is." The words hit her like a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading outward. She felt herself blink again, caught off guard by the depth in his answer. This wasn't just a child repeating something. It was belief. "Okay," she whispered. She slipped the bill into his box anyway, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into her purse. "Thank you, Ethan." He looked startled. "How do you know my name?" Sarah froze, then realized he had signed the corner of the drawing, a small, uneven scrawl, "Ethan, age 8. She smiled faintly. "I just read your signature." "Oh," he said, cheeks pinking. He shifted nervously, but his eyes still shone. Sarah lingered longer than she intended. Around them, life moved on, cars parking, shoppers bustling in and out. But for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them, a successful woman with hidden scars and a little boy with too much responsibility for his years. Finally, Sarah straightened, adjusting her scarf. You keep drawing, Ethan. Don't stop. You have something special. He nodded, the kind of nod that meant he wanted to believe her. As she turned toward the store, she caught one last glimpse of him from the corner of her eye, small shoulders squared against the wind, cardboard box at his feet, hope burning quietly behind his determination. Inside the store, Sarah pushed her cart down the aisles, but her mind wasn't on groceries. It was on the rainbow folded in her purse. Every time she thought about tucking it deeper into her bag, her hand hesitated. It felt wrong to hide it, as though it deserved to be seen. By the time she checked out and walked back to her car, she knew the encounter had done something irreversible. The drawing wasn't just paper. It was a key, unlocking doors inside her she had locked long ago. She started the car, but before pulling out of the lot, she glanced back once more. Ethan was still there, his jacket too thin, his shoes still damp, but his eyes still searching the crowd with quiet hope. Sarah exhaled slowly, her chest heavy. She whispered under her breath, "Why do I feel like I was meant to see you?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. But deep down, Sarah already knew. This was no coincidence. It was the beginning of something larger than both of them, something that would test her, change her, and perhaps, finally heal her. The camera of the story lingers on her SUV pulling away, Ethan's small figure shrinking in the rear-view mirror. The audience feels it, the pull of destiny tightening, drawing two strangers together in a way that neither of them could yet understand. The afternoon sky dimmed into early evening by the time Ethan walked home. His small sneakers slapped against the cracked pavement of a neighborhood where paint peeled from old porches and mailboxes leaned slightly to one side. The houses weren't falling apart, not completely, but they carried the quiet exhaustion of lives stretched too thin. Laundry lines sagged in backyards. Rusted pickup trucks sat unmoving in driveways, waiting for paychecks that might never come. Ethan clutched his backpack in one hand and the few dollars he had earned that day in the other. His fingers curled tightly around the bills, protecting them from the wind. It wasn't much, 4 crumpled ones and a handful of coins, but to him, it felt like treasure. When he reached the small apartment building on the corner, its brick faded and stair railing squeaking, he bounded up 2 flights of steps. Their door, Unit 2B, was marked by a crooked number and a welcome mat that had lost its letters years ago. He pushed it open without knocking. "Mom. I'm home." The voice that answered was warm but weary. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm in the kitchen." The apartment smelled faintly of frying onions and old coffee. The living room was neat but sparse, a second-hand sofa with one leg propped on a stack of books, a small TV on a stand missing a drawer, and a faded quilt folded neatly over the backrest. On the wall, taped at uneven angles, hung Ethan's drawings. Rainbows, trees, superheroes, and a few clumsy portraits of his mother smiling. Laura Mitchell, 28 years old, dark circles under her eyes but beauty that hardship couldn't erase, stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. Her waitress uniform clung to her shoulders, name tag slightly bent. She turned, smiling at him, her tiredness hidden behind practiced cheer. "There's my little man. How was today?" Ethan set the money carefully on the counter beside her. "I sold 4 drawings." Laura glanced down at the crumpled bills, then back at him. Her heart clenched, though she masked it with another smile. "That's amazing, honey. I'm so proud of you." "I'm gonna sell more tomorrow," Ethan said eagerly. "Maybe I can get enough to help with," he trailed off, catching the quick flicker in her expression. "With what?" she asked softly. He shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Just, stuff." Laura knelt, pulling him into a hug. She breathed in the dampness of his jacket, the faint crayon smell still clinging to his fingers. "Sweetheart, you don't have to worry about grown-up things. That's my job." "But I want to help," Ethan insisted, pulling back. "You work so hard, Mom. You're always tired." I hear you at night." Her eyes widened slightly. "You hear me?" Ethan looked down at his sneakers, scuffing the floor. "Sometimes. When you cry." The silence that followed pressed heavy between them. Laura's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that he had imagined it, but lies tasted bitter and Ethan was too smart for his age. Instead, she cupped his face gently. "I cry because I'm human, not because I'm giving up. You're my reason to keep going, Ethan. You hear me? Not my burden. My reason." He nodded slowly, though the worry didn't fully leave his small face. They sat down to dinner, soup thin but warm, bread slightly stale but filling. Ethan slurped happily, as though it were a feast. Laura watched him, her chest aching with love and guilt in equal measure. Afterward, Ethan pulled out his sketchpad and began drawing at the small kitchen table. He worked quickly, colors blending awkwardly but passionately. Laura wiped down the counters, sneaking glances. His little brow furrowed in concentration, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth. "What are you making tonight?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "A surprise," Ethan said without looking up. She smiled faintly. His surprises usually involved rainbows, superheroes, or stick figures holding hands. But each one was precious. Each one reminded her of the innocence she was trying so desperately to protect. Later, after Ethan had brushed his teeth and crawled into bed, Laura stood in the narrow hallway outside his room. The apartment had 2 small bedrooms, though one was barely bigger than a closet. Ethan's space was filled with hand-me-down furniture, a twin bed with mismatched sheets, a lamp missing its shade, stacks of books rescued from thrift stores. "Good night, Mom," he mumbled sleepily. "Good night, sweetheart. Dream good dreams." She kissed his forehead, turned off the light, and lingered by the door. When she finally retreated to the kitchen, the weight of reality crashed down again. She opened the drawer where unpaid bills lay stacked. Electric. Rent. Hospital. She pressed her hands to her face, the strength she had shown Ethan moments before crumbling into quiet sobs. The rent notice glared at her, final warning, eviction pending. Her chest heaved. She whispered into the empty kitchen, "God, please, just give me a little more time. For him." The refrigerator hummed in answer. The clock ticked mercilessly. She thought of calling her mother for help, but the silence between them had grown too wide. She thought of asking her manager for more shifts, but her body already ached from double shifts as it was. Every option seemed impossible. Then her eyes drifted to the wall, to Ethan's newest drawing taped beside the fridge. A rainbow, crooked but radiant, stretching over 2 stick figures. Underneath, scrawled letters, "Me and Mom. Always together." Her tears fell faster. She pressed her forehead to the cool cabinet door, whispering, "I'll find a way, baby. I promise." Meanwhile, in his small bed, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had pretended to sleep when his mother checked on him, but the sound of her muffled crying carried through the thin walls. His little fists clenched. He whispered to the darkness, "I'll help you, Mom. I'll make enough. Somehow." He rolled over, hugging his sketchpad to his chest. In his dreams that night, the rain didn't soak him. Instead, his drawings lifted him like wings, carrying him and his mother into the sunshine. The camera lingers on the dim apartment, the contrast stark, inside, love strong but resources thin, outside, the city moving on, indifferent to their struggles. The audience feels the ache, poverty not painted as laziness, but as a quiet battle fought every day with dignity, pride, and hope. And through it all, a little boy's crayon rainbows stand as fragile shields against a storm too big for his small shoulders. Sarah's apartment glowed with the soft amber of recessed lights when she stepped inside later that evening. The city skyline stretched across her windows, lights blinking like constellations stitched against a velvet night. To anyone else, it might have looked like a picture of success, a woman in her 30s with her own place in one of the most expensive neighborhoods, a glass of wine on the counter, the faint hum of jazz playing from the speakers. But appearances were liars. She set her purse down and walked directly to the small table near her sofa. On it lay the crayon drawing she had bought from Ethan. She had smoothed its edges earlier, pressing it flat between heavy books, almost as if protecting it from further weathering. Yet even with its wrinkles and water stains, it seemed to glow more vibrantly than the sleek art prints framed across her walls. Sarah stood there, staring at it, a heaviness pressing into her chest. She tried to distract herself, kicked off her heels, changed into sweats, poured a glass of Pinot Noir, but the drawing always pulled her back. Two stick figures, holding hands under a rainbow. Words scribbled at the bottom, together in the sunshine. Simple. Childish. And yet, it had more life than anything else in her carefully curated space. She sank onto the sofa, glass in hand, eyes fixed on the drawing. Her mind wandered to her own childhood. She could almost smell her father's cologne, faint and woodsy. She remembered sitting at their worn kitchen table, crayons scattered across the surface. Storms would roll in, shaking the windows, and she would grow frightened. Her father would chuckle softly, pulling out paper and sketching sloppy rainbows. "Storms don't last forever, kiddo," he used to say. "The rainbow always comes." Her throat tightened. He had died when she was only 12, and she had carried that emptiness ever since. Her mother had done her best, stern, disciplined, unwilling to show weakness, but Sarah had always longed for that gentleness her father had carried so effortlessly. Now, staring at Ethan's drawing, she felt that wound reopen. She set her glass down, rubbing her temples. "It's just a child's drawing," she whispered to herself. "Why does it feel like it's tearing me apart?" The silence answered her. Silence always did. Sarah's eyes drifted across the apartment. Everything was spotless, symmetrical, designed with precision. She was known for her ability to turn homes into showpieces, and her own place was no exception. But looking at it now, she realized something: it didn't feel alive. There were no messy fingerprints on the walls, no toys left in the corner, no shoes scattered at the entryway. Just order. Just control. Just emptiness. She exhaled sharply, standing and pacing. She picked up her phone, scrolled through messages, clients asking about fabric swatches, contractors confirming schedules. Not one message from family, not one from anyone who truly knew her heart. She thought of her mother, Evelyn, at Maplewood Nursing Home, waiting with her crossword puzzles and ginger tea. Sarah had visited earlier, staying just long enough to deliver groceries and endure a polite but tense conversation. She had left quickly, retreating back to the safety of her apartment. But safety was a cage. She looked again at Ethan's drawing. That boy, small, soaked, determined, had stood in the rain for hours just to help his mother. He hadn't complained, hadn't begged. He had simply believed his effort mattered. Sarah compared it to her own life. She had everything society told her should be enough: money, status, independence. Yet, sitting there with her wine and her skyline, she had never felt more hollow. She whispered into the quiet room, almost ashamed of her own voice, "When did I stop believing in rainbows?" Her eyes stung. She swiped at them angrily, unwilling to let tears fall. She had built her life on strength, on never appearing weak. But tonight, that mask cracked. She saw the truth: her success was polished armor covering loneliness she had never dared admit. The drawing seemed to accuse her gently, asking questions she had no answers for. Why had she let go of family? Why had she abandoned connection in exchange for perfection? Why did the love of a child she didn't even know affect her more deeply than anything in years? Sarah moved to the window, clutching the paper in her hands. Below, the city pulsed with life: people walking dogs, couples holding hands, taxis rushing past. She pressed the drawing against the glass, watching the reflection of the rainbow overlay the glowing skyline. She whispered, "That boy has nothing, but he has more than I do." The words hung in the air, shocking her with their honesty. By midnight, Sarah sat at her desk, laptop open, pretending to focus on client emails. But the drawing lay propped against her lamp, refusing to be ignored. Every time she looked at it, she thought of Ethan's eyes, clear, determined, too wise for 8 years old. She thought of the pride in his voice when he explained he was helping his mom. A wave of guilt swept over her. Here she was, with abundance, while children like Ethan stood in the rain just to keep food on the table. She thought of Laura, the unseen mother working behind the scenes, carrying more than her share of burdens. Sarah imagined her, young, exhausted, praying bills would stretch. She imagined Ethan overhearing late-night tears, just as Sarah once had. Her chest tightened again. It wasn't pity she felt, it was recognition. Different circumstances, same ache. She closed her laptop, finally admitting the truth: she couldn't push Ethan out of her mind. His small act had planted something in her, something dangerous but undeniable. Hope. And with hope came responsibility. As she crawled into bed, the drawing sat on her nightstand, the last thing her eyes saw before sleep. She reached out, tracing the rainbow one more time. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a promise forming in her soul: "I'll see you again, Ethan." The camera lingers on the dim bedroom, the rainbow glowing faintly in the lamp's light. The city outside continues to glitter, unaware that inside this apartment, a woman's heart has just begun to change course. The following Saturday, Sarah found herself driving back to the small town. She told herself it was coincidence, that she had errands near Maplewood, that she wanted to check on her mother again. But deep down, she knew the truth: she wanted to see Ethan. The rain had cleared, leaving the sky a pale blue streaked with thin clouds. Autumn leaves swirled along the sidewalks as her SUV rolled past small storefronts, antique shops, a barbershop with a striped pole, the old movie theater whose marquee now advertised community events instead of films. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's names, and where an outsider like Sarah stood out the moment she parked. She had noticed the diner on her previous trips but had never gone inside. Today, however, something drew her to it. The neon sign buzzed faintly: Millie's Diner. A chrome facade, red vinyl booths, and the smell of coffee and fried bacon spilling out as soon as she pushed the door open. The bell above the entrance jingled. Heads turned briefly, then went back to their meals. The place was alive with small-town chatter: an older couple debating football scores, 2 teenagers sharing a milkshake, truck drivers laughing loudly near the counter. And then she saw him. Ethan sat in a corner booth, his little legs tucked under the table, a notebook open in front of him. His pencil moved quickly, sketching lines with focused intensity. Next to him sat a half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich and a chocolate milkshake sweating in the sunlight streaming through the window. Sarah's chest tightened. Behind the counter, carrying 2 plates balanced expertly in one hand, was Laura. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose bun, her uniform slightly faded but clean. She moved with practiced efficiency, weaving between tables, smiling politely at customers though her eyes carried shadows of fatigue. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen at the entrance, unsure whether to approach. But the waitress spotted her, offering a warm, automatic smile. "Table for one?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, please." Laura gestured toward a booth across from Ethan's. "Anywhere you like." Sliding into the booth, Sarah picked up a menu though her eyes flicked constantly toward the boy. He was so absorbed in his drawing that he didn't notice her. His pencil scratched across the page, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Laura came by with a notepad. "What can I get you, hon?" Sarah glanced up, forcing a polite smile. "Just a coffee, please. Black." "You got it." As Laura walked away, Sarah felt an odd tightness in her chest. Up close, she could see the resemblance between mother and son, the same determined eyes, the same quiet strength. And yet, Laura's shoulders seemed heavier, her movements laced with exhaustion. A few minutes later, Laura returned with the coffee. "Here you go." She set it down gently. "Haven't seen you around before. Passing through?" Sarah hesitated. "Something like that. I actually noticed your son the other day. Outside the grocery store." Laura froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a small laugh. "Yeah. That's Ethan. He's got a creative streak. He's very talented," Sarah said softly. "I bought one of his drawings." Laura's eyes flickered with surprise, then softened. "Did you?" "He was over the moon when he came home with a few dollars. Said someone liked his rainbow." Sarah's throat tightened. "Yes. I did." Laura nodded, but her gaze drifted toward her son, who was still bent over his sketchpad. A shadow crossed her face, one Sarah almost missed. Pride mixed with worry, love mixed with something heavier. "Excuse me," Laura said quickly, moving to another table where a family of 4 waited for refills. Sarah watched her go, then turned her attention back to Ethan. She could just make out the drawing he was working on, a small house under a night sky filled with stars. The lines were clumsy, but the feeling was there, hopeful, almost wistful. After a while, Ethan looked up and spotted her. His eyes widened, recognition flashing. He smiled shyly, then waved. Sarah smiled back, lifting her hand in return. He hesitated, then slid out of his booth, clutching the sketchpad. In small, tentative steps, he crossed over to her table. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi, Ethan," she replied warmly. "Still drawing?" "Always," he said, almost proudly. He set the pad down, flipping to the page he had just finished. "This one's for my mom. It's our house, only better." Sarah looked at the drawing, the tiny apartment transformed into a bright cottage, flowers blooming around it, stars shining above. 2 figures stood by the doorway, Laura and Ethan, smiling together. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered. Ethan's grin widened. "Do you really think so?" "I really do," she said honestly. "You have a gift, Ethan. Not everyone can put this much feeling on paper." Before he could respond, Laura's voice called softly from across the diner. "Ethan, sweetheart, don't bother the customers." "She's not bothered," Ethan protested, glancing back at Sarah. Laura came over, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry if he disturbed you." "Not at all," Sarah assured her quickly. "We were just talking about his art. He really is talented." Laura gave a small, tired smile. "He's got big dreams." Her voice softened. "I just hope I can give him enough to chase them." The words pierced Sarah. They carried no self-pity, just a quiet truth. For the next hour, Sarah lingered in the diner, sipping coffee, listening to the rhythm of small-town life. She watched Laura juggle orders with a grace that only came from necessity, always keeping her smile even when her feet must have ached. She watched Ethan return to his booth, diligently sketching between bites of sandwich, occasionally looking up at his mother with unshakable admiration. The contrast was striking. Sarah, with her skyline apartment and empty nights. Laura, with barely enough money but a son who adored her and a bond no wealth could buy. When Sarah finally left, the bell jingling above her, she carried more than the taste of coffee on her tongue. She carried a seed of realization, one that unsettled her as much as it stirred her. On the drive back to the city, she whispered to herself, "They have nothing, but they have everything I don't." The audience feels the shift, Sarah's perspective widening, her walls beginning to crack. She has discovered not just Ethan's world, but the quiet heroism of a mother who endures storms with dignity, and the boy who believes his crayons can change the weather. The first snow of the season dusted the small town, though it didn't look like the picturesque postcard Sarah's city clients paid to recreate in their living rooms. Here, snow mixed with mud on cracked sidewalks, clung to rusting porch rails, and seeped into shoes not built for weather. For Ethan and Laura, snow didn't mean holidays or cocoa. It meant colder nights, higher heating bills, and one more layer of struggle. It began with an envelope. Laura found it wedged in their mailbox one Thursday evening, its red letters glaring like a wound, final notice. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, scanning the lines she already knew by heart. Rent overdue. Balance unpaid. Eviction imminent. She leaned against the stairwell wall, closing her eyes. She couldn't let Ethan see this. Not tonight. When she pushed open their apartment door, she pasted on her best smile. Ethan sat at the table, crayons scattered around him, drawing a snowman beneath a crooked Christmas tree. He looked up, his grin wide. "Mom, look. I made us in front of a tree. Someday we'll have one like this, right?" Laura swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Of course, sweetheart. Someday." She slipped the envelope into her purse, out of sight. But Ethan noticed the shadow in her eyes, even if she didn't say a word. He always did. At school the next day, Ethan carried his sketchpad everywhere, his comfort against the whispers. The kids in his class weren't cruel by nature, but children noticed differences like hawks. His jacket was too thin, his shoes scuffed, his lunch smaller than most. During recess, while Ethan sat on a bench sketching, two boys from his grade snickered behind him. "Hey, Rainbow Boy," one jeered, snatching the pad from his hands. "Give it back," Ethan cried, leaping up. The second boy flipped through the pages, laughing. "Look at this. Stick figures and rainbows. What are you, a baby?" A small crowd gathered, some laughing, some just watching. Ethan's face burned. He reached out desperately, but the boys danced back, holding his drawings high. "This is stupid," the first boy sneered. "Nobody wants this junk. My dad says your mom can't even pay rent." The word sliced deeper than any teasing about rainbows. Ethan froze, chest tightening. "That's not true," he shouted, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The boys tossed the sketchpad into a puddle. The colors bled instantly, his hard work dissolving before his eyes. The crowd scattered as a teacher approached, but the damage was done. Ethan crouched, hands shaking as he lifted the soggy pad, pages torn and ruined. That night, Laura found him unusually quiet. He pushed his dinner around his plate, eyes fixed on nothing. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked gently. "Nothing," he whispered. But later, when she tucked him into bed, he clutched her hand tighter than usual. "Mom, are we gonna have to leave our house?" Laura's breath caught. "What makes you ask that? Kids at school said you can't pay rent. They laughed at me." His voice cracked. "Is it true?" Tears pricked Laura's eyes, but she forced a calm tone. "Don't you worry about that, Ethan. I'll take care of us. I promise." But when he fell asleep, she sat in the kitchen, staring at the eviction notice. Her hands shook as she dialed a second job application hotline, leaving her third voicemail that week. Days later, another storm rolled in. Cold rain lashed the streets, soaking through coats and gloves. And once again, Ethan stood outside the grocery store with his box of drawings. "Drawings for $1, he called, voice hoarse. But today, no one stopped. People rushed past, clutching umbrellas, hurrying to their warm homes. His small hands trembled as he held up a drawing of a house with yellow windows glowing against a dark sky. Hours passed. His box remained full. His voice grew weaker. Still, he refused to leave. He thought of his mother's tears, of the eviction notice she thought he hadn't seen. If he didn't help, who would? But his body had limits. His legs wobbled. His breath came short. Finally, with the rain pouring harder, Ethan swayed, and collapsed onto the wet pavement. Sarah was driving through town that evening, heading back from her mother's nursing home. Her headlights cut across the road when she saw the small figure crumpled outside the grocery store. Her heart lurched. She slammed on the brakes, pulling over. Throwing open her door, she rushed into the rain. "Ethan," she cried, kneeling beside him. His small body was limp, his clothes soaked through. His crumpled box lay beside him, papers bleeding color into the water. Panic surged. Sarah gathered him into her arms, his head lolling against her shoulder. His skin was clammy, his breaths shallow. "It's okay, I've got you," she whispered fiercely, sprinting back to her car. The hospital was bright, sterile, and unfeeling. Sarah sat in the waiting area, clothes damp, Ethan's ruined drawings clutched against her chest. Nurses rushed past, machines beeped, families murmured anxiously. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled the air. Laura arrived minutes later, face pale, hair damp from running in the rain. "Where is he? Where's my son?" Sarah stood quickly. "He's inside. They're taking care of him." Laura's eyes blazed with panic. "What happened?" I found him outside the grocery store. He collapsed." Laura pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling. "Oh, God." "Ethan," the two women sat side by side in silence, waiting for answers. The contrast between them couldn't have been sharper, Sarah in her expensive coat, Laura in her soaked waitress uniform. Yet in that moment, they were bound by the same fear, the safety of a little boy who meant the world. Finally, a doctor approached. "He's stable now. Mild hypothermia and exhaustion. We'll keep him overnight for observation." Laura's knees buckled with relief. She whispered a prayer, then turned to Sarah, eyes shining with gratitude and shame. "Thank you, for being there." Sarah shook her head. "I just happened to drive by." "But Laura, he shouldn't have been out there alone." Laura's face crumpled. "I know. I should have stopped him, but, he wants to help so badly. He sees me struggling, and he thinks it's his job to fix it." Her voice broke. "I never wanted him to carry that weight." Sarah swallowed hard, guilt and empathy crashing together. She looked down at the ruined drawings in her lap. The colors bled together into messy swirls, yet beneath the smudges, she could still see Ethan's hope. She whispered, almost to herself, "He's just a child. But he carries more than most adults ever do." Laura didn't respond. She simply wept quietly, shoulders shaking. In that sterile waiting room, the cruelty of the world lay bare. A boy with talent and heart, forced to fight storms too big for him. A mother doing everything right and still punished by a system that demanded more than she had. And a woman of means, realizing for the first time that all her success meant nothing if children like Ethan were left out in the rain. The camera lingers on Sarah's face as she looks at Laura, then back at the closed hospital door. Something unspoken shifts inside her. This wasn't just an encounter anymore. It was a call to action. The hospital at night felt like another world, white walls humming with fluorescent lights, the echo of footsteps down long corridors, the faint beeping of machines behind closed doors. Sarah sat in the waiting room, her coat draped over her shoulders, Ethan's ruined sketchpad resting in her lap like fragile evidence. Laura emerged from Ethan's room, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. She lowered herself into the chair beside Sarah, exhaling shakily. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of exhaustion and fear pressed down too heavily. Finally, Laura whispered, "He's sleeping now. They say he'll be okay if he rests." Sarah nodded, relief softening her shoulders. "That's good. He's strong. Laura gave a hollow laugh, wiping her eyes. Too strong for his age. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I should have stopped him. I should have told him no. But when he looks at me with those eyes, so determined, how could I? He wants to take care of me, when it should be the other way around. Sarah glanced at her, something unspoken tightening in her chest. He loves you more than anything. That much is obvious. Laura swallowed, staring at the floor. Do you know why he started selling his drawings? He told you it was to help me, right? Yes, Sarah said softly. Laura shook her head, voice breaking. It wasn't just the rent. It was the hospital bills. My mother, his grandmother, was sick for years. Cancer. We did everything we could. I worked double shifts, begged for payment plans, sold my car. But it wasn't enough. When she passed, the debt didn't disappear. It followed us. Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Laura pressed her fists against her eyes. Ethan overheard me once, crying over another collection notice. And the next day, he showed up with a box of drawings. He said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll pay it off. $1 at a time." Her voice cracked. How do you tell your child that no matter how many rainbows he sells, it'll never be enough? Sarah looked down at the sketchpad in her lap, the pages warped with water. She ran her fingers over a blurred rainbow, her throat thick with emotion. Laura continued, her words trembling. I thought maybe it was a phase. That he'd get tired. But he didn't. Every day after school, he'd sit at that table, coloring until his little hands cramped. And every time I tried to stop him, he'd say, if I sell enough, maybe you won't cry anymore. The room blurred in Sarah's eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. She whispered, almost to herself, oh, God, he was carrying all of that alone. Laura's hands shook as she twisted her napkin into knots. I failed him. I should have shielded him. He should be worrying about baseball games and video games, not medical debt. Sarah turned toward her, her voice urgent. No. Don't say that. You're doing everything you can. You're showing up, every single day, even when it breaks you. That's not failure. That's strength. But Laura shook her head, her tears spilling freely now. Strength doesn't keep the lights on. It doesn't keep a roof over our heads. And now he's in a hospital bed because I couldn't protect him. Sarah reached out, covering Laura's trembling hand with her own. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to be. Laura looked up, startled by the intensity in Sarah's voice. Sarah's own composure cracked. She pressed her fist against her mouth, but the tears poured anyway. I can't stop thinking about him. About both of you. I keep asking myself, how can I live in a glass tower, surrounded by everything money can buy, and still feel emptier than I ever imagined? And then I see Ethan, standing in the rain, giving all he has, and I realize he has more heart than I've had in years. The two women sat there, side by side, their separate pains colliding into something shared. For the first time, the barriers of class, pride, and circumstance dissolved. They were just two mothers, one by blood, the other by possibility, both broken in their own ways. Through the quiet sobs, the sound of Ethan's stirring drifted from the room. Laura rose quickly, wiping her face, and Sarah followed. Inside, Ethan lay against crisp white sheets, his cheeks flushed with fever but his eyes fluttering open. Mom, he whispered weakly. I'm here, sweetheart, Laura said, rushing to his side, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Ethan's gaze shifted to Sarah. A faint smile tugged at his lips. You came back. Sarah's chest tightened. She pulled a chair close, leaning near. Of course I did. I told you your drawings were special. I couldn't forget. He reached out a shaky hand toward his sketchpad. Sarah quickly placed it in his grasp, though its pages were warped. I'm sorry they got ruined, he murmured. Sarah shook her head, her voice breaking. No, Ethan. They're perfect. They always were. His small hand squeezed hers, eyes heavy with exhaustion. I just wanted to help Mom. I didn't want her to cry anymore. Laura covered her mouth, stifling a sob. Sarah bent closer, whispering fiercely, You've already helped more than you know. Your love is bigger than any bill, Ethan. Bigger than any storm. He smiled faintly, then drifted back into sleep. Silence filled the room again. Sarah looked at Laura, who stood frozen, hand on her son's arm, tears streaming unchecked. The reality of what this child had carried for them both pressed in like a weight too heavy to bear. Sarah turned away, clutching the ruined rainbow drawing to her chest. In the harsh hospital light, she finally let herself break. Her sobs shook her shoulders as she whispered over and over, He's just a boy. He shouldn't have to carry this. He shouldn't. Laura's hand found hers. They clung to each other, strangers bound by one boy's fragile strength. The camera lingers on the three of them, Ethan asleep, his mother weeping, Sarah holding the drawing like scripture. The cruelty of the world is laid bare, debt, exhaustion, innocence sacrificed. And yet, within that cruelty, love burns fierce and unyielding. The audience feels the ache deepen, the tears flow, and the question rise, how can a world so rich leave a child to fight storms alone? The snow outside had deepened overnight, blanketing the town in silence. Inside the hospital room, morning light filtered through half-closed blinds, casting pale stripes across the bed where Ethan slept. His chest rose and fell in even rhythm now, his fever breaking slowly. Sarah sat in the corner chair, a blanket draped over her knees. She had stayed through the night, refusing to leave even when Laura told her she didn't have to. There was something about the boy, about the way he carried more hope than his small frame should hold, that rooted her to the spot. When Ethan stirred awake, he reached instinctively for his sketchpad. His fingers brushed over the warped pages, disappointment flickering in his eyes. They're ruined, he whispered. Sarah leaned forward. Not ruined. They're still beautiful. He shook his head stubbornly. Nobody wants smudges. Then show me something new, Sarah said softly. Ethan hesitated, then pulled out a separate folder tucked under his blanket. Inside were fresh pages, dozens of drawings she hadn't seen before. He handed one to her shyly. It wasn't childish. Not really. The lines were uneven, but the soul of it was unmistakable. It was a portrait of his mother, sitting at their small kitchen table, her head in her hands, bills scattered in front of her. The details were rough, but the emotion was raw, pain, exhaustion, love all bleeding together in pencil strokes. Sarah's breath caught. She flipped to another, a street scene, rain pouring down, a small boy holding up a drawing while people passed him by. Another showed a diner, a waitress carrying plates with a tired but determined smile. These weren't just doodles. They were windows. She looked at Ethan, stunned. Ethan, these are extraordinary. He shrugged, embarrassed. They're just drawings. No, Sarah said firmly. They're more than that. You're telling stories with these. You're showing people what life feels like. Laura, who had been quietly listening, shifted uneasily. He just likes to keep busy, she said modestly. Sarah shook her head. No, Laura. This is talent. Real talent. She spread the drawings across the bed, her designer's eye-catching details others might miss. Each sketch carried emotion that no training could fake. She felt something stir inside her, an idea sparking like a match in darkness. What if people could see these, she murmured. Laura frowned. People? What do you mean? I mean more than selling them for $1 on the sidewalk, Sarah said, her voice growing steadier with conviction. I work in design. I know gallery owners, people in the city who are always looking for authentic stories, for real art that touches hearts. If we could organize a small exhibit, showcase Ethan's work, she looked between them, eyes bright. People would see. They'd understand. Laura looked skeptical, almost defensive. We don't have money for things like that. And I don't want to turn him into some charity case. Sarah leaned forward. This wouldn't be charity. It would be recognition. His work deserves to be seen. Ethan deserves to be seen. Ethan's eyes widened, hope flickering. Like, a real art show? With people coming to look at my drawings? Yes, Sarah said, smiling despite herself. Exactly like that. Laura exhaled, torn. I don't know. Sarah reached across the bed, gently covering Laura's hand. Let me help. Please. You've been fighting this storm alone for too long. Maybe this is a way out, not just money, but dignity. A chance for Ethan to know his gift matters. Laura searched Sarah's face, looking for hidden motives, but all she saw was sincerity. Finally, her shoulders sagged. If it's really for him, then maybe. Ethan's grin spread wide, the first genuine joy Sarah had seen since meeting him. Mom, did you hear? A real art show. Laura smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. We'll see, sweetheart. Over the next week, Sarah's idea grew roots. She reached out to contacts in the city, an old client who managed a small gallery, a colleague who loved sponsoring community projects. At first, they hesitated. An 8-year-old's crayon drawings weren't exactly marketable. But when Sarah sent photos of Ethan's deeper sketches, the diner, the rain, his mother's kitchen, the responses shifted. These are powerful, one gallery owner said over the phone. There's honesty here. People will respond to this. Sarah felt a surge of triumph. Then let's do it. One night. A small showcase. We'll frame his best pieces, invite local press. Just give him a platform. Arrangements began to fall into place. The gallery reserved a date, printers agreed to donate high-quality frames, even a bakery offered to provide refreshments once they heard the story. Word spread quietly, and to Sarah's surprise, people wanted to be part of it. Back in the small apartment, Ethan worked feverishly. Every night after homework, he sat at the table, sketching until his hands cramped. He drew the diner with more detail, the rain outside the grocery store, even the hospital room with his mother asleep in a chair by his bed. Each picture felt heavier, more alive, as though he knew this was his chance to be heard. Laura watched with mixed emotions, pride swelling in her chest, fear lurking in her eyes. I don't want him to get his hopes up too high, she confessed to Sarah one evening. He's already carrying hope, Sarah replied gently. At least now, he won't have to carry it alone. Finally, the night arrived. The gallery in the city buzzed with quiet anticipation. Its walls, usually filled with polished, abstract canvases, now held Ethan's work, frames lining the white walls, each piece carefully arranged by Sarah's trained eye. His rainbows glowed alongside sketches of real hardship, a juxtaposition that caught attention immediately. Guests filed in, locals, reporters, even a few city patrons curious about the boy artist. The hum of conversation filled the space. Ethan clung nervously to his mother's hand at the entrance, his small frame dwarfed by the high ceilings and elegant crowd. He wore a button-up shirt Sarah had bought him, slightly too big, tucked awkwardly into his pants. His eyes darted between the walls, disbelief etched across his face. Mom, he whispered, tugging her sleeve. They're all looking at my drawings. Laura squeezed his hand, her own eyes glistening. Yes, sweetheart. They are. Sarah approached, beaming. Are you ready? Ethan nodded shakily. I think so. As guests wandered, whispers began to rise. This is raw. So much emotion for a child. You can feel the story. Reporters scribbled notes. A local photographer snapped pictures of Ethan standing shyly beneath one of his rainbows. A wealthy patron approached Sarah, murmuring about potential commissions. But the most powerful moment came when a middle-aged woman paused before the sketch of Laura at the kitchen table. She covered her mouth, tears welling. That was me, she whispered to no one in particular. That was my life, too. Others gathered, nodding, moved not by perfection but by truth. For the first time, Ethan wasn't a boy selling papers in the rain. He was an artist. A voice. A reminder. And as Sarah watched him, pride swelling in her chest, she realized something. This wasn't just about saving Ethan and Laura. It was about saving herself, too. She had found purpose again, something beyond design and deadlines. The twist of fate was clear. A little boy's drawings, dismissed by strangers in the rain, had become a beacon of hope, first for his mother, then for Sarah, and now for everyone who walked through those gallery doors. The audience feels the shift, despair transforming into possibility, darkness cracking open to let in light. The storm had not ended, but the rainbow had finally found its sky. The gallery's hum had swelled into a low roar. By mid-evening, the once small event had grown beyond expectation. Every wall was crowded, every frame surrounded. Local reporters scribbled furiously, patrons debated in hushed tones, and people who rarely crossed into galleries, working mothers, fathers with kids in tow, stood side by side with city elites. Ethan stood in the center of it all, his hand locked tightly in Laura's. His eyes darted around, wide with disbelief. People weren't just looking, they were seeing. Each sketch seemed to touch someone different. The diner scene made a waitress cry softly into a napkin. The rain drawing made a businessman shift uncomfortably, muttering, "I've walked past him before and never noticed." And then came the piece no one could pass without stopping. The portrait of Laura at the kitchen table. Guests stood frozen before it, whispering, some wiping their eyes. The rawness was undeniable, desperation captured in pencil, love woven into every line. Laura stood off to the side, embarrassed yet proud, tears slipping despite her best efforts. She whispered to Sarah, "I can't believe this. They're staring at me like I'm a subject in a museum." Sarah smiled softly. "Not at you. At your strength. At what Ethan sees in you." Before Laura could respond, the gallery director approached, flustered but excited. "We've had multiple offers already. People want to buy. Some are asking if Ethan takes commissions." Ethan's mouth fell open. "Buy my drawings?" Sarah crouched, meeting his eyes. "Yes, Ethan. People want to take your stories home. They see their own lives in yours." Laura placed a hand on her chest, overwhelmed. "This is too much. I don't even know how to process it." And then, through the crowd, a familiar figure appeared. Sarah froze. Her mother. Evelyn Hayes, sharp as ever in her tailored coat, moved with quiet authority through the throng. People parted instinctively. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, her face composed, though her eyes flickered with something Sarah hadn't seen in years, softness. Sarah straightened, her pulse racing. She hadn't told her mother about this night. She hadn't wanted to. But somehow, Evelyn had found her way here. "Mother," Sarah said cautiously. Evelyn's gaze swept the gallery walls, lingering on Ethan's sketches. Her lips trembled, just slightly. Finally, her eyes met Sarah's. "You did this?" Sarah hesitated. "No. He did this." She gently guided Ethan forward. "Mother, this is Ethan." Ethan blinked up at the elegant woman, instinctively clutching Laura's hand tighter. Evelyn studied him, her usual steel softening. "You drew these?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said shyly. For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then, to everyone's surprise, including Sarah's, she knelt down, lowering herself to Ethan's height. "They're extraordinary," she whispered. Ethan's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Evelyn said firmly, her voice thick. Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't seen her mother bend for anyone in decades. As the evening continued, the emotional current deepened. A reporter asked Laura to speak, pressing a microphone gently into her hand. She froze, panic flashing. Public speaking wasn't her world. But Ethan tugged her sleeve, whispering, "Tell them, Mom." Laura swallowed, her voice trembling as she began. I never thought we'd be here tonight. Most days, I was just praying to keep the lights on. My son," she glanced at Ethan, tears glistening. "My son carried more than he should have, because he saw me struggling. He thought his little drawings could fix what I couldn't. And tonight, seeing all of you here, I realize, maybe he was right." The room hushed, every ear straining. Laura's voice steadied. "These pictures aren't just ours. They're everyone's. Every parent who's worried about rent. Every kid who's seen their mom cry and wanted to make it better. Ethan puts love on paper. And that's something money can't measure." Applause erupted, loud and long. Some people stood. Ethan blushed, burying his face in his mother's side. Sarah felt her throat ache. Pride swelled so fiercely it hurt. And when she glanced at her mother, she saw tears glinting in Evelyn's eyes, a sight rarer than any gallery piece. Later, when the crowd thinned, Evelyn approached Sarah quietly. For once, her tone wasn't sharp. "You've always been searching, haven't you? For something real." Sarah's eyes filled. "And I finally found it. In them." She glanced toward Laura and Ethan, who were laughing softly together as he clutched a ribbon someone had given him. Evelyn's hand, cool but trembling, reached for Sarah's. "Then hold on to it. Don't let your fear push it away like it did with us." The words cut deep, but they healed, too. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a bridge instead of a wall. As the night drew to a close, the gallery director tallied the donations and sales. "You won't believe this," he told Laura, astonished. "With purchases and pledges, we've raised enough to clear your debt, and then some. You and Ethan won't have to worry anymore." Laura's knees buckled. She sank into a chair, covering her face as sobs shook her shoulders. Ethan hugged her tight, whispering, "It's okay, Mom. We're okay now." Sarah stood nearby, tears streaming freely, her heart pounding. She had seen wealth in many forms, but never like this, not in numbers, not in checks, but in healing a family's soul. In that climactic moment, everything converged: Ethan's sacrifice, Laura's strength, Sarah's rediscovered purpose, Evelyn's softened heart. The gallery had become a sanctuary where suffering transformed into hope. The camera lingers on Ethan, small yet radiant, holding his rainbow drawing high as if presenting it to the world. And for the first time, the storm truly began to break. The night of the gallery lingered in everyone's memory like a dream that refused to fade. For Ethan and Laura, it wasn't just an event, it was the first time life had given them more than it had taken. For Sarah, it was a mirror, showing her that wealth without connection was nothing more than loneliness wrapped in gold. And for Evelyn, it was a reminder that even the hardest hearts could soften when confronted with innocence and truth. In the days that followed, the impact spread. Local papers ran headlines, "Boys' Rainbows Bring Hope to a Community," and "Art from the Heart, Child's Drawings Move Crowds." Television stations carried short features, showing Ethan shyly smiling as his mother held him close, his sketches displayed proudly behind them. People across the town began to recognize him, not as the boy selling crayon pictures in the rain, but as the artist who painted hope. At school, classmates who once ignored him now treated him like a small celebrity. Teachers framed copies of his rainbows on the classroom wall. Yet through it all, Ethan remained the same, modest, a little shy, but glowing with quiet pride. Laura, for the first time in years, could breathe. The donations from the showcase paid off the crushing hospital bills, caught up the rent, and even left enough for savings. She no longer woke each morning with a knot in her chest, wondering if the lights would be cut off that day. Instead, she began thinking about the future, college savings for Ethan, maybe even nursing school for herself. One evening, Sarah visited their apartment, now warmed by laughter instead of silence. The living room, once dim and bare, had a new rug, a second-hand couch, and framed copies of Ethan's most loved drawings. Sarah watched as Ethan sprawled on the floor with markers and fresh paper. "Still drawing?" she teased. "Always," Ethan said, grinning. "I'm working on one for you." Her chest tightened. "For me?" "Yeah," he said, tongue poking out as he concentrated. "Because you believed in me before anyone else did." Sarah blinked back tears, her heart swelling. "That means more than you know, Ethan." Laura, standing in the doorway with a mug of tea, smiled softly. "He never stops. I think it's how he makes sense of the world." Sarah turned to her, her tone warm but serious. "And you? How are you holding up?" Laura exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxed after years of carrying invisible weight. "Better than I have in a long time. For once, I don't feel like we're drowning." She paused, then added quietly, "And, thank you. For everything. You didn't have to do this, but you did. You changed our lives." Sarah shook her head. "No. He changed our lives. I just helped open the door." Laura's eyes glistened. For a moment, both women simply stood in the quiet understanding that their lives had been woven together by a boy's crayons and courage. Meanwhile, Sarah's own journey had taken an unexpected turn. The gallery showcase had reignited something long dormant in her, a desire to create meaning, not just products. She began speaking with nonprofits about funding art programs for underprivileged kids, envisioning spaces where children like Ethan could be nurtured instead of overlooked. At a brunch one Sunday, she shared the idea with her mother. Evelyn listened, sipping her coffee in thoughtful silence. "You know," Evelyn said at last, "when you were Ethan's age, you used to sketch in the margins of your notebooks. I told you to focus on something practical. I was wrong." Sarah's eyes widened. Her mother rarely admitted mistakes. Evelyn's voice softened. "I wanted to protect you from disappointment, but I forgot that art isn't frivolous. It's survival."